GDP stands for Gross Domestic Product, and it measures the size of a country's economy over a certain time period, usually a quarter or a year. In this video, we're going to find out how GDP is measured, why it's important, and whether or not there are any disadvantages to using GDP to calculate the size of a country's economy. But first, why don't you hit the subscribe button and like this video for more great content. GDP can be measured in three ways. Firstly, by adding up everyone's income over the period, which includes the profits that businesses make. Secondly, it can be calculated by adding up what everyone has spent. This is mostly made up of household spending, but it also includes what the government spends in terms of investment and subsidies, as well as what we buy from abroad. Thirdly, GDP can be worked out by adding up the total value of all goods and services produced by a country. The ONS, which calculates the GDP for the UK, uses all three, but GDP is mostly calculated by adding up what everyone spent. But why is GDP so important? GDP is important because it is a measure of a country's economic health, which can be used to compare it to other countries. When GDP goes up, it means the economy is growing, more people are employed and are spending more, and businesses are expanding. When it goes down, the opposite is happening. People are spending less, and businesses shrink as they are not getting enough revenue, meaning people might get laid off. Unemployment goes up. GDP also gives economists at central banks an important insight into the health of the economy, which helps them know whether to adjust things like interest rates to help slow down or speed up the economy. Raising interest rates encourages people to save money, thus slowing down the rate of economic growth and averting things like economic bubbles. Lowering interest rates does the inverse. It pushes people to spend, which speeds up the economy. Studying GDP can also push economists to look at other factors to try to find out why a country's economy is in a certain state. For example, if economists study trade, they might see that the country imports more goods than it exports, meaning trade deficit goes up. More money is being spent overseas, which shrinks GDP. If, on the other hand, a country exports more than it imports, it means there is more money coming from overseas into the country, and GDP resultantly goes up. However, GDP is not the only way to measure a country's economic health. As the previous example just highlighted, GDP does not account for the economic output of residents of a country working overseas. For example, the economic output of a German factory in the USA would contribute to the GDP of the USA, not to Germany's. GNP, or Gross National Product, can be used to remedy this. GNP calculates the size of the economy that residents of a country are part of. So the economic output of the German factory in the USA would register as part of Germany's GNP. GDP, on the other hand, is more geographical, calculating just the size of a country's economy within its borders. As well as this, GDP does not show how the economy of a country is split, so even if GDP is growing, and thus the economy on the rise, this doesn't mean its effects are being equally shared. Moreover, population needs to be taken into account when calculating GDP. If population outgrows GDP, and GDP actually stays the same or increases very little over the time period, per capita, meaning per person, GDP has actually fallen. Inflation also needs to be borne in mind when calculating GDP. This can be done by calculating real GDP, which adds the effect of inflation on top of a country's GDP. Last but not least, GDP is not a measure of quality of life. It doesn't measure how happy or how healthy people are. It is purely an economic measure. That's GDP. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe.